Hey, what's up, lightboltjoe here. Today we are going to discuss the 1992 cult classic basketball film, White Men Can't Jump. So, I've wanted to watch the remake for a very long time. Since they announced it, since Jack Harlow started filming it, I was like, this is interesting. First of all, why are they remaking this? Second of all, can it hold up? Now, I haven't seen the remake yet because I wanted to refresh and watch the entirety of the first film. 1992, White Men Can't Jump. Wesley Snipes plays Dean. Oh no, last name is Dean. Um, Billy Hoyle is Woody Harrelson, and then Gloria is played by Rosie Perez. So, Sydney Dean. So, I've never seen this movie in its entirety. I've seen bits and pieces over the years, ever since it came out. I was 2 years old when this came out. The aesthetic of this is so early 90s, and it's just wonderful. It's a very cultural film, and I say that because it's very, you know, certain parts of LA, certain parts of of Southern California, it has different beach vibes, it has different urban vibes, it has different the actual Hollywood studio vibes. When Gloria gets on Jeopardy, that whole thing was just really cool to watch it as well. It's just the costuming, the it's not really costumes, it's just clothes. It was just clothes that they wore, and it's just nothing specifically made for a character. It's this shirt was being sold at that store at that time, that pair of shorts was being sold at that store at that time, and it's just they put the clothes together to make this costume, and it's just so wonderful. The soundtrack actually had two soundtracks. They released two soundtracks for this film, part one and part two, and it's just pure hip-hop throughout the entire thing. There's hip-hop, there's R&B, there's rap, and it's very cultural of that time period, of that region, within the fascination of basketball to R&B in the late 80s to late 90s. That 10-year time period was just vastly important on a cultural aspect, and it felt very cultural. Aside from the story being really cool, and aside from the actors doing a great job, and aside from everybody doing an amazing job within the talent of it, it takes a lot of physical activity to do these particular trick shots and things like that. Everybody does a great job, but it's just neat watching this now, 31 years later. It's been a long time, and seeing it from a historical standpoint, that specific aesthetic is very prominent and celebrated, and it's not bashed upon. Like you watch this and you're like, you don't go, oh, why would they wear their hat like that? You're like, oh, they wore their hat like that. It's a difference. It's a different mindset. When you get out of the why did we do those stupid things back then, and you do the that's what we did back then, as an acknowledgement. The past gets you to the present, and what you do in the present determines what happens in the future. So it's neat. I like seeing that from that different mindset. I'm glad I'm now in that different mindset as opposed to the reverse back in the day. It's because I've seen and watched a billion things within 2023 and 22 and 21 and so on and so forth and what have you. It's a lovely Steel Heck reference. Now, 1992, White Men Can't Jump. This is an hour and 55 minutes long. They could have shaved 10 minutes. It would have been perfectly fine. I love how there's no ending to this. It just ends, and it's okay. It reminds me of these Goosebumps books that I keep reading, which take place in the 90s, conveniently. Because a lot of these stories, a lot of the Goosebumps stories, lead you up to a moment, and then it just ends. And you're like, well, what happens next? You don't really need to know what happens next, but it would be nice to know what happens next. So in this particular story, Sydney and Billy are doing their hustling basketball stuff after they meet on the playground. It's not a playground. It's a basketball court on Venice Beach. And so they're hustling. Well, Billy's hustling Sydney, and then they hustle together. But then there's stuff. There's, money laundering sharks tracking the Stucci brothers, and what's going to happen with Sydney and his wife and their kid, moving forward and stuff. They should have done a sequel to this, to be completely honest. And I haven't seen the remake yet. It should have been a sequel about Sydney's kid doing stuff, because Sydney's kid would then be in his 30s, around the same age range that Wesley Snipes and I was going to say Harrison Ford. No, not Harrison Ford. when their characters were in the 90s would have been the same age range as if the son grew up, and the sequel would have been about him hustling and stuff, taking after his dad or trying to do better than his dad, something. I think that dynamic, the Woody Harrelson dynamic and Wesley Snipes dynamic, worked very, very well together. And I think that if there was a sequel to this 30 years later, which would be now, of Wesley's character of Sydney, son, being grown up doing hustling stuff, that would have made more sense. Why they did a remake couldn't, I don't know. And I'm nervous to watch it. I'm so excited because I like Jack. So I'm curious. We're going to watch it. We're going to talk about it. That's why I wanted to watch this to refresh so I'm prepared. But I feel like I haven't even watched it yet, but I already know it should have been a sequel rather than a remake. Anyway, aside from that, Rosie Perez does an incredible job as Gloria in this, and she deserves way more awards than she actually has. Her work reminded me a lot of Marissa Tomei's work in My Cousin Vinny, which was early 90s as well. And so it's the same kind of character arc with that heavy New York accent and, I'm a strong woman, I don't need no man kind of a thing, but still give the affection. I love it. I absolutely love it. I didn't expect to see that dynamic, My Cousin Vinny to White Men Can't Jump. Now, my favorite Wesley Snipes movie, is 1993's Demolition Man. You have Sandra Bullock in that as well. You have her co-star in Miss Congeniality in that as well, which was then in 2001. Sylvester Stallone is in this. A slew of people are in this, and I love Wesley's character in Demolition Man. It's just such a cool character. That's the most I've seen him in film-wise, and he was a big star within the 90s as well. He did Blade. Now that we have a new Blade movie coming out, will he come back as Blade? Will he come back as his original Blade within the multiverse? Who knows? MCU is wild right now. But it's really cool watching something from 92. This film that was just made, it did incredible at the box office because the soundtrack was incredible. The two soundtracks, excuse me. The whole 90s aesthetic was just pure and celebrated, and it was just wonderful. It brought good conversation pieces about race. It brought good conversation pieces about assumption. It brought good conversation pieces about, should you continue to hustle? Should you settle down, get a job? Is it worth breaking the dream to settle things, right? It's very interesting. It's a very interesting conversation piece. It's very well done. The dynamic that Wesley and Woody Harrelson have together is cool because they riff off each other. And a lot of the stuff that you can tell when actors are riffing off each other, when actors and actresses are riffing in a scene, you could tell a lot of it's not from the script, that it's just pure improvised with the screaming and the grunts and the I'm gonna punch you and things like that, right? That kind of emotional aspect is all dependent on your scene partner and how you can improvise with the scene. The script can say this at some point and just get there, right? And then other times scripts are very specific. You have to say this, you have to say that, you have to say this. But this film had a lot of that pushy back and forth dynamic, which worked very well with the two of them. They worked very well together. I'm curious why I have not seen them in anything else together, playing frenemies. So it was a good watch. It got me thinking immediately of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movies from the early 90s, because that was the same hip hop and rap and R&B soundtrack, and it was just wonderful, absolutely wonderful listening to that, listening to this as well, getting flashbacks of that, realizing we've never talked about the Turtle movies. We have to do that. A lot of things. This movie's got me thinking of a lot of things. I'm curious what happens when I watch the sequel. Excuse me, not the sequel, the remake. And I'm gonna scream at the camera and say, "I told you. You see, I said it. The words came out of my mouth. This should have been a sequel. This should have never been a remake." I'm curious how right I'm gonna be. Let's move on. I don't know how many reviews later we're gonna get to the sequel, remake, but let's see. Let's see what the first words come out of my mouth are when we get this. So maybe the second or third or fourth review from now. Who knows? I'm not actually keeping track. I have another Goosebumps book to read and finish. That's going to be after this. I don't know what's after that. Let's see. Let's see what happens. I'm very curious what my reaction is going to be. On to the next review. Mucho mahalo.